Greetings, I'm John Duvall. Welcome back to another Truth Factor discussion. If you had just joined us before we officially started, we got to have a nice little conversation about controversial things, but important things. But right now, we're going to exercise wisdom and look at the book of Ecclesiastes. Continuing our study of Ecclesiastes, we'll pick up in chapter 4 here in just a moment. If you're joining us for the first time, we want to say thank you. You can participate in our study depending on where you're watching this. If it's on our YouTube channel, you can use the chat area. If it's on our Facebook page, then you can comment on this live video stream, and we'll monitor those. We'll definitely love to hear from you. Again, questions, comments, thoughts, send them our way, and we'll bring them into the study. But let's go ahead and jump right into this, and let me go ahead and read the first 3 verses. This is what we talked about last week. Pardon me. And then we'll start then with verse 4 for our discussion. Then I returned and considered all the oppression that is done under the sun. And look, the tears of the oppressed, but they have no comforter. On the side of their oppressors there's power, but they have no comforter. Therefore I praised the dead who are already dead, more than the living who are still alive. Yet better than both is he who has never existed, who has not seen the evil work that is done under the sun, or who has not seen the evil work that is done under the sun. Bear with me just a moment.
Better than both is he who has never existed.
Let's see. There we go. So with that being said, and like I said, we talked about this last week, we got to keep in mind that the writer here is, while what he writes seems to be very depressive, it is very, very depressed, I should say, when you think about life without God. And fundamentally, when you're striving for this and that, and then you come to the end of your life and you've not striven to, you haven't sought to serve God, then truly what is there for you at the end? So let's go ahead and pick up with verse 4. And Brendan, with an E, not with an A. Start there in verse 4 and read through verse 8, if you would. And let's kind of talk about this section here.
Okay. We're reading from the English Standard Version. Then I saw that all toil and all skill and work come from a man's envy of his neighbor. This also is vanity and a striving after wind. The fool folds his hands and eats his own flesh. Better is a handful of quietness than 2 handfuls of toil and a striving after wind. Again, I saw vanity under the sun. One person who has no other, either son or brother, yet there was no end to all his toil, and his eyes are never satisfied with riches. That he never asks, for whom am I toiling and depriving myself of pleasure? This also is vanity and an unhappy business.
Okay. All right, backing up here, Brendan, and looking at the section here, the little header in the translation that we're using on the screen there says vanity of selfish toil. When we look at this particular section there, here's what I found very interesting. And see, I want to get your thoughts on this. He says, again, I saw that for all toil and every skillful work a man is envied by his neighbor. This also is vanity and grasping for the wind. He's about to talk about that. So is he kind of painting the picture here where the neighbor is looking on at the man who appears to be working hard, appears to be very skilled in what he does and laboring very hard, and the neighbor is envious of that. And then he's about to explain there's a problem with being envious of this individual's labors. What are your thoughts?
It's keeping up with the Joneses. And so much of, at least our cultural context issue, is envy of what everybody else is doing. Social media has some great benefits, like we can broadcast a Bible study on YouTube and Facebook and people can join in. That's a good benefit. But social media is very curated. People only see what I want you to see. So you only see the good family photo, not the screaming toddler and the tantrum that was had 2 minutes before that photo was taken. You see the vacation, that we're all on, and not the marital spat that happened, the day before we left, and so forth. It's curated. And why do I say this? Social media is kind of designed, and it amplifies this fear of missing out, or the fear of missing something better, and it's paralyzing, and we don't have the whole picture. And so much of the labor and toil and what we're doing in this country with our finances and our possessions, it's simply to keep up with an image that actually isn't real. And I gave some negative examples, but somebody gets the new house. We don't know the sacrifices they went through and how many pennies they saved in order to make that happen. We just see the new house and we feel like, well, we need that, instead of just accepting and being content with what we have. He goes further on. I jump a little ahead. We come back to that word vanity again, that the vapor, the emptiness. All this man's work and effort is because he's trying to keep up with an image that doesn't exist. And Solomon says this is an empty pursuit, and it's like trying to keep up with the wind or capture the wind. You're never going to be satisfied, and it's never going to have an end to it.
Yeah, I think it's interesting.
Yeah.
I was looking at the. Go ahead, Tom. Yeah, go ahead.
No. You want to say? Yeah, I have some thoughts on it. If you want to say what you want to say first, though.
Well, it's kind of comparing, just kind of looking over the difference between the ESV and the New American Standard or New King James Version, and there's really not much difference other than maybe the layout. But anyway, go ahead, Tom. We've got a few more things in this area I want to talk about. Let's see what you have to say, though.
With the problems we have in society today, you look through Ecclesiastes, you look through Proverbs, and so much of the Bible, and you can just see how this applies today. In these verses here, 4-8, I kind of see the idea of you. Solomon is just saying, you can't win, no matter what you do. I actually see three work groups that are mentioned here. In verse number 4, I see the man who is working hard, and he's getting done what needs to be done. This is the one who's responsible with everything that he does, and as a result of that, he has a little bit extra. I see the sloth, and then I see the workaholic. I see all three of them, and it doesn't matter what category you're in. There's a problem. You've got the one that he's doing his job and he's doing it properly. And this is the one who ought to be respected. And I think that's the verse 4, every skillful man, but he's envied. How many people today envy those who are out there working hard because they have a little more than what you, you get to go on a vacation and I don't get to go on a vacation. Never mind the fact that I've chosen not to work. Or I've chosen to work as little as I can, or I've got myself in debt up to my eyeballs where I can't afford to do that. And as a result of that, I'm going to be jealous of you because you have something that I don't have. So we got that envy issue today. Then you've got in verse 5, the fool that folds his hand consumes his own flesh. I would describe this as the sloth. This is the one who, what's the use? Or he does as little as he can. And of course, you've got the contentment in verse 6, but then you've also got verses 7 and 8, where you've got the one that, here you've got somebody, he's alone. He doesn't have anybody, but yet he just works all the time. Maybe that's why he's alone, because he's consumed with his job. But he just keeps working and working, and he may amass this big amount of money, huge resources. But for who? But for what? As Solomon has said before, and he'll keep saying it, you know what? You're going to die. And who are you going to give it to? What good is it going to do? All that you have amassed, what profit is it to a man if he gains the whole world, loses his own soul? So you got all three of them who are here. and of course there that third one, I think of Ebenezer Scrooge, until his turnaround. That's kind of the way that he was as you find him in there, not satisfied and just every penny and a miser and so on. But for what? So, anyways, that's what I see Solomon. And again, it goes back to the vanity of life. If in this life only we have hope, we are of all men most pitiable. That's what Paul said over in 1 Corinthians 15 and verse 19. Okay, back to you, John.
Let's see. Looking at a comment here real quick from Michael. Let's bring it in here. Michael says, the faithful soul is only content when that soul accepts God as the sustainer. All that man does for himself is vanity unless he is putting God first and is grateful for his being sustained by God. Michael offered a couple corrections there post his submission of this. But I think it's a good point. The faithful soul is only content when that soul accepts God as the sustainer. Not himself, not the world, not his job, but God as the sustainer. All that man does for himself is vanity unless he's putting God first and is grateful for God's sustainment of that individual. And he references Hebrews 13, 5 through 6. And I think it's a very, very good point. Okay. All right. With that being said, what about verse 6 there? I don't want to try to get too detailed on it, but it's fun for the discussion. Better a handful with quietness than both hands full together with toil and grasping for the wind. Tom, I kind of like his breakdown there of the workaholic and then the lazy man and then kind of the one in the middle there. And I'm wondering if the one in the middle is that guy with verse 6. Better with a handful of quietness than to live your life trying to gain everything and toil for full fulfillment of all things. Just have what you need, what is necessary, be content with that, and enjoy your life there.
Yeah. Oh, and you could definitely, and I see verses 4 and 6 tied to that one.
Yeah.
Then, or you could actually say verse 4. He's talking about toil and skillful labor, dealing with all of them. The various approaches. But yeah, you got the one. And of course, I can't help but when I look through this, I mean, the verse that just pops in my mind is 1 Timothy 6. 1 Timothy 6 and following. Godliness with contentment is great gain. We brought nothing into this world. And then those who desire to be rich fall into a snare, a trap, which drowns them. And you've got all of that.
But then he does say, if they are rich, to help others.
Yeah. That's 17, verse 17.
To make good use of that, yeah.
Yeah, exactly, verse 17. Yeah, and understand in all of this, it is not sinful to be prosperous. That's a whole nother point within itself. It is not sinful to be wealthy, to be extremely wealthy. It's what's your attitude toward what you have, and how did you get it?
In our adult class last night, I was filling in for David, who currently teaches on Wednesday night. We were looking a little bit at the sin of mankind from the beginning, come down to the days of Noah. God looked upon the hearts of man and saw that his thoughts were evil continually. That is something we should always remember, that when we talk about God's judgment of us, it begins with the heart. I know our words and our actions will have to get account for them, but those things originate from our heart. And so, unless something is expressly forbidden by scriptures, and a lot of the things that are considered sinful, think about Galatians 5:21 through 23, stems from something wrong with the heart. And the fruits of the Spirit come from a heart that is striving to serve God. And so I only say that to back up what you're saying there, Tom. If an individual desires to be rich and that's his full pursuit, his heart's already at the wrong starting point in serving God. But if he works hard and makes that money, but serves the Lord and loves the Lord all along, puts him first, then that's what's most important. So.
Yeah, and by the way, John, in thinking about this, you also have to consider that we need those wealthy people.
Well, sure.
I mean, we really do. I mean, so when you start begrudging those who have the resources, you just understand that we need those people. And I'm going to tell you right now, here in Bellflower, we're a very small group, but we're blessed. We're able to do some things because of those who have resources in our congregation. I'm not going to go into the details, don't need to, but the point we need those people, and I think that was God's intent. All along, you have the varying groups helping each other, complementing each other,
Yeah.
and
I was
you
told
just got to avoid the sinful attitudes.
Yeah. Years ago, I was told a story about a preacher, and it's been so long ago. It's one of those preacher stories, may or may not be completely accurate, but it's embellished to sound good from the pulpit. But he, that's right, fish this. Anyway, so he was adamantly opposed to gambling, all sorts, buying lottery tickets, everything, understandably. But the complaint kind of was, but every time there was some sort of game going on at the grocery store, at McDonald's, anywhere like that, he would go and spend money there so that he could play the game, the scratch off, whatever it was, and everything. And so the question was, is there a difference in attitude? One, greed could be pushing me to go gamble, but I can't because it's wrong. But since I'm not wagering any money, I could go and participate and buy all the Big Macs I want in hopes that I'll win $1 million. The motivation's the same on either side. So why is one more wrong than the other? It comes down to the heart of the matter. God's going to judge that first, then everything else falls accordingly in accountability.
Couple points on yours and Tom's discussion there. So I guess some truth factory moments on Ecclesiastes in general, what we've been talking about. So Dave Ramsey points out, and I think the psychology and the science is there. Money doesn't do anything in that it's not going to make you happy and it's not going to make you miserable. It only reveals what you already are. And so if you have a heart that's greedy, it doesn't matter if you have $10 or $10 million. All that money is going to do is as much as you have, it's going to multiply. There we go. That's the word I'm looking for. Multiply what you already are. Yeah. So there's a reason why, this is why contentment and the right mindset and just keeping yourself focused on your own business is so important to live the good life now, which Ecclesiastes, there's some difficult spots. Absolutely. You guys dealt with one last week, so I didn't have to. Better is the person never born or the stillborn. Like, that's a difficult passage.
Yeah.
But when you look at the whole book of Ecclesiastes, it's really teaching us like, hey, this life is temporary. Live it with the mind that you are going to die and be judged. God is real. But also, as he said back in chapter 2 and verse 25, who can eat and who can have enjoyment without God? God has given these things to us in this life to enjoy. It is not wrong to have an abundance if we have the right attitude and stewardship of those things. It is not wrong to rest from your labors or to enjoy the fruit of our labors. Now, you can abuse that. That's where the sin of sloth comes in. It's not wrong to do any of those things if we have our priorities straight. And there are some believers that are awful cases to be made for Christianity because they are so fixed on eternity that they live miserably in the present. Jesus said in John 14:15, I came that you may have joy and have it more abundantly. This isn't prosperity or health and wealth gospel. This is simply in Christ with God. You are actually enabled to fully enjoy this life for what it is, a temporary experience that God has given us pleasures untold. In my favorite book on Ecclesiastes, the writer made this point. How do we know God wants us to enjoy life? He didn't have to give us 10,000 taste buds that can distinguish between sweet and salty and savory and sour and all that stuff, but he did. Chocolate exists for a reason. Coffee exists for a reason. The idea to create chocolate cake and cobbler exists for a reason, because God wants us to enjoy the blessings of this life. So when we look here in chapter 4, kind of tying things back, labor is good. Labor is very good. Very first thing God told Adam when he was finally made is like, cultivate and keep the garden. You have a mission and purpose to do here. Man needs to work. However, just like sloth is the abuse of rest, excessive toil is the abuse of the goodness of labor. Because he goes on later to say, one person who has no other, in verse 7, either son or brother, yet there's no end to his toil. He never asked, for whom am I laboring? Working is good if it serves a greater purpose. And if you're working to no end, to no purpose, it's vanity, Solomon says. Since Tom brought First Timothy 6, the mature believer delights in the fact that they can labor and be abundant, because that means they can help others who are not as fortunate as they are, or not in the same situation. There are some congregations out there, as Tom brought up, that thanks to the generosity of one or two members, they're able to afford to do work that congregations of their size normally can't do. So we need both. But anyway, those are my thoughts.
Well, let's bring in a comment. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, we probably need to move on. Just 2 sound bites based upon what Brendan said, and I put them in our chat. Money is morally neutral. Understand that.
Yeah.
And number 2, it's possible for a lazy person that envies the wealthy. More than likely, he's greedy. He has a greedy disposition about him. He's wanting more than what he's able to get on his own, or what he chooses to get on his own. So just 2 sound bites. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, it's a good point. Comment from Danelle. Money is not the root of all evil. It's the love of money. That's what Paul says. It's the love of money that is evil, so we need our hearts to be right. Good point. Very, very good point. All right, well, let's go ahead and consider now this next section here real quick. We've already read through it. We'll walk through it real quick. We have Solomon then coming back saying, then I returned and saw vanity under the sun. And here is as it's described. There's one alone without companion. He has neither son nor brother. Yet there's no end to all his labors, nor is his eye satisfied with riches. But he never asks, for whom do I toil and deprive myself of good? This also is vanity and a grave misfortune. Who do you think, or what type of person, I should say, do you think he's describing here?
John, I think in this one here, where he's talking about the one without companion, I think he's talking about the one that's just working, and it's just working to make money. And no matter how much he makes, it's never enough. And I mean, and you might even describe this as someone that maybe he lost his family. He lost his family because he loved his job so much. He loved money so much. He lost everything else as a result of that.
Yeah.
And
to say, for whom do I toil and deprive myself of good?
Yeah.
Implies there's no one there for him now.
Yeah, exactly. Now the New King James says, but he never asks that. He never asks that part. So he's making the point there. He never asks himself, why do I keep adding zeros to my bank account? I don't have any family. All is just sitting there, and I can't use it. I mean, again, Ebenezer Scrooge. When you watch the movie, that was the premise that he had in his life. He held on to things so tight. Or if you want to go the cartoon direction, Scrooge McDuck. you remember that show, the picture of his vault, and he's swimming in his coins.
Well, what was interesting. I was going to say, what's interesting about the New King James Version is, and he never asks, those words are in italics, meaning they're supplied by the translators for clarity. So, Brittany, go ahead.
Well, just real quick on that, New American Standard has the same italicized, but New King James says no companion. New American Standard says there was a certain man without dependent, literally second, having neither son nor brother. So whether it's wife, kids, legal guardianship, whatever it is, there's no one. He has no one to support.
Yeah.
In either way, and my point here was going to be, and I lost it, so I'm gonna make up a new one.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. Is, before marriage, before that intimacy, before that covenant, God said to Adam, "It's not good that man should live alone." Eve, before anything else, first and foremost, was given to Adam as companion, as for community. Now that came with marriage and everything. You're the only man and woman, all that stuff. And okay, I got the thought back. The sad thing of our age and the big irony is we are more connected than ever, and we are the least connected generation. Because again, we have the ability, but we're finding out the online, even video chatting, is not the same as flesh and blood. And so you can labor, but it's going to drive you insane. And you're going to be a very lonely shell of a person. And so, whether it's be laboring, in our labors, let's make sure somebody can benefit from them. Whether it's we applied James 1 at the end of the chapter there, that maybe I'm the single person. Maybe maybe I have the gift of singleness, as Paul says in 1 Corinthians 7. Or maybe I've just made that choice, or I'm not married yet. Whatever it may be. Okay, let's take the ending of James 1. If I'm laboring, let my labors be for the orphan and the widow. Let my labors be for the brethren. Let my labors be for a just cause, or whatever it may be. I have to have a greater purpose than just working, because it's going to drive. I'm going to die inside. I mean, I really am. So, yeah, there it is.
We've got two comments I want to bring in. And in just a moment, verses 9 through following kind of touches on what you're talking about, the benefit of being with others, as we go further here. But let me bring in Michael Davis's comment, and then I'm going to bring in Andy's question. So to start with starting with Michael's. Michael says, such a man, the one we're talking about here, ignores the good he could do for others and thereby show his prosperity comes from, and thereby would show that his prosperity comes from God, because he's willing to help others and do good for others. And that's a good point. Good point. But let me bring in what Andy says. How about somebody who has a family who is stuck earning minimum wage, so they have to always work and never see their families? That is a real issue. And I'm not going to be so, I guess, would the word contrite be, say, well, just go get a better job making more money. So you don't have to work as hard, because those things are not always an easy solution. And, I have known of men who would sometimes have to work 2 jobs, maybe 3, in order to be able to provide for their families. My dad, years ago, he had to take a second job for a while before he got an increase as a work as a mechanic. He ended up having to work part-time at Sears for a period of time. So he'd go from work in Atlanta to Sears and repair mowers and stuff like that, and it would make him later getting home. And even with that, you still have to ask yourself what's most important. Not saying you quit working and stuff like that, but when you get home with your family, you value your time with them. If you have to work an 11-hour day and come home and you only have 2 hours with your family, make it the best 2 hours you possibly could have. But yeah, that's a very valid question. Someone who is stuck earning minimum wage, they're barely surviving with their family, they're having to work maybe even 2 jobs. You really have, and sometimes I guess someone may ask the question, what's driving you to do that? Well, in this case, it's not for your own selfish reasons. You're working the extra time, and the strength that you're working is for the benefit of your family. You know.
And to that point, John, it's a good question, but it is such a moving target, depending on family dynamics, abilities, part of the country you live in, and really, and you handled it well, but I think to try and give a cookie cutter answer, this isn't the place for that, because it depends so much on the individual's abilities and circumstances. But there are solutions, whether working to find a different job, getting a second job for a season. That's important to note. It's for a season. This is not a permanent solution. Looking at budgetary things, what can you cut? What do you need to? Can the spouse temporarily work or whatever it may be? But kind of what we're talking about earlier, it comes down to, what do you want? And are you willing to make the short-term sacrifices to get that? So.
Yeah. And there's a difference between the one that we're mentioning here. If you're working to provide for your family, incidentally, you're doing what God told you to do. And so you're fulfilling your responsibilities. That's different from Ecclesiastes 4:8. You've got the one here who that's not his situation. But it's a good point to bring up. Yeah. I mean, and we have to be sympathetic of that. And incidentally, that's why we need to be slow to judge. Slow to judge when somebody is out there and doing the two or three jobs. They may be struggling to make ends meet, and you know what? God bless you. I mean, you see your responsibilities there.
I knew a preacher
fulfilling those responsibilities. What?
I knew a preacher years ago who had to quit preaching. Knew of a preacher, I should say, years ago, who had to quit preaching for a season because of health issues related to his voice. And so during that time, he went into secular work for however long it was, 2 or 3 years. And it was a struggle, but thankfully he had some training to go back to. But here's the point. When he got back, when he was able to start preaching again, he had a different understanding for the brethren out there who are working 50, 60 hours a week. This whole thing, well, just tell your job you can't come on when you can't work on Wednesday nights and come to church. He realized that the struggle was much greater because he saw those struggles himself.
Right. Yeah.
And if someone goes from high school to college, they get married, they start preaching, and you don't spend a period of time working some job that requires, 50, 60 hours a week, it's really hard to relate. And making the teachings from the pulpit relatable to the struggles that people have in striving to survive and serve the Lord.
Yeah. I mean, It's why I know certain training programs will not take a young man to preach unless they've worked a number of years in secular work, or, or if they have a degree, it can't be in Bible, because if it doesn't work out, they can't fall back on anything.
Right.
I remember back in college, it's the reason why I had to quit my part-time job, but I was basically preaching full-time, student full-time, and working part-time to make ends meet. And there was one Sunday, I'm driving back from Sweet Home, Oregon on I-5, and I'm nodding off at the wheel. I'm like, okay, something's got to give. But, the point here I think we're trying to make is just each circumstance is different. There needs to be some empathy with the brethren, and especially for those of us who do preach full time, who have that blessing of full support. We kind of need to be reminded of that from time to time.
Yeah. Think of the preacher who's been a preacher all his life. That's all he's ever done. And for the gospel meeting, he gets on to the person who has to work on Thursday night in the meeting. And I know there's a whole lot more. There's more like all of these. There's variables in this, but the point is he doesn't understand the work environment.
It's almost
what it is. I'm going to be
yeah.
here every night. By the way, I just happen to get paid to preach, and so I mean my job is with the church. So whatever the church is doing, I'm there, and as opposed to the one that has to go out and provide for their family and so on, it's they're just absolutely exhausted as the week goes on. Even if, think of the one that's there every night. They've been working their 40-hour job and so on. I always thank brethren, whether I'm preaching in a meeting or after a gospel meeting here, I thank the brethren for the efforts that they put forth to be there during the week, because it's a sacrifice, and a sacrifice that a full-time preacher sometimes doesn't understand or doesn't get, if he's not going to stop and think about it for a moment. So
yeah. It's that's why I'll say that I had a preacher tell me when I first started preaching that he thinks every preacher should work in the secular world for a period of time before going into full-time preaching. Right. Because that way you have two reasons. You have a better understanding, but also you have something to do if the brethren can't fully support you.
Right.
Paul didn't throw a fit and say, well, you can't support me. Now I got to go out and make tents. He did that with an attitude. This is what he was trained to do, I guess, what he could do. And he even told some churches, don't support me, because I don't want to be accused of preaching something just because you paid me. I mean, that's kind of a bad paraphrase of it.
So, kind of sounds like Paul.
It does, doesn't it? Yeah. But back to Andy's question, though. That's a very valid point. I mean,
it is.
There is that balance, and sometimes it's hard to find. But ultimately, what's in the heart of that person? I love the Lord. I love my family. I want to provide for them, and I'm gonna do what I can to provide for them, but provide for them in all areas as well. And then if you can do better, find a better job, work two jobs. I mean, but you got to start with the right heart, I should say, in service to God and your family.
Right.
Because
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah, I was
going
to
to say because if not, you'll end up alone.
Yeah, exactly. The 2-year program that Josh was in, preacher training program.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if can I mention Randy Duvall by name?
Yeah, he's got a great last name.
But anyways, Randy requires them to work in the morning. They go to work at 5:00, and by the way, he has an arrangement with McDonald's and Subway, and he requires them to work till about noon or so, and then they study in the afternoon. And there was a parent one time that asked, "Can we just support our son? We'll take care of him, and we'll pay his room and board and whatever all that is." Randy said, "No, this is a part of the program." And what's interesting is that it was a job at McDonald's, so you're talking a minimum wage job. And the point is being willing to do whatever you have to do,
mm-hmm.
To help you so that you appreciate why you're preaching. Anyways, that's so.
That's a good point. I mean, he charged him room and board, a nominal amount.
Yeah, he didn't take advantage of them.
No, and it teaches good life lessons.
Yeah.
Because sometimes as a preacher, you're not guaranteed to be always fully supported. Yep. And there have been a lot of preachers who have done decently. I'd say their needs have been met through the years. They've supported well, but as they get older, they find it harder. They find it more difficult to find congregations that can fully support them. And so in their twilight years, they find themselves struggling. And it could be due to poor money management through the years and things of that nature. But I don't know what that has to do with what we're talking about, but it's somewhere there.
Well, it's the work. We've been dealing with work, so.
Yeah, that's true. Yep. And some preachers could do the same thing that the ecclesiastical writer's talking about.
Yeah.
I have known of some preachers who were so into the local work that their family actually suffered. At times when they needed them there, they weren't there for them.
Right. And you've got the preachers that envy other preachers because, you come straight out of a preacher training program and you expect to be recognized with the experience of somebody that's been
Yeah.
preaching for 50 years. So
And-
you've got the spectrum.
Yeah.
And again, back to the point of contentment here, and I'm just gonna throw
Yep.
this out there.
Yep.
I know I'm the anomaly. I came out of a training program into an established congregation in a two-man
Yep.
setup. Most guys my age, got to pay your dues and
Right.
work in a smaller congregation, and that's
Work your way up.
Yeah,
for
that's
lack of
just-
a better term.
right.
If you can call working it up.
And it's so, and Andy makes a good comment. I'm just going to bring that in. If somebody's preaching Jesus is supposed to be first, though, and that's absolutely right. And we're talking about how some preachers lose that. Some get that all mixed up, and that's because I'm going to pull in 1 Corinthians 7, why Paul said during that current distress, it's better not to take a wife because you're going to be so concerned about your wife and your family and everything else. But there's a point here that, as Jesus said, the laborer is worthy of his wages. And, for preachers at least, you want to support them enough where ideally they don't have to worry about health insurance or paying the bills, and they can support their families so they can focus totally on the work. Does that always happen? No. Should it? I don't know. I'm just the young guy here. But they're okay. Andy continues to go on. This means if they neglect their families, they are doing what they're supposed to for Jesus, since they're supposed to love Jesus first, even if it means not being able to love anybody else. Well, that may seem that way, but if we just go, I'm just going to reference it. Galatians chapter 5 talks about how, no, is it Ephesians 5? I get these two mixed up. It's Ephesians 5. How husbands are supposed to love their wives as Jesus loved the church. So there's to serve Jesus first in all things. And if you're married, that means you also have to love your wife and support her and the family. That's included in putting Jesus first. So those are in those commands anyway. We probably want to be moving on since we are getting close to the hour, and we've talked a lot about, more about preaching than about the text. At least I feel I have. So,
Well, yeah, let's go ahead and do that. Tom, I'm gonna have you, if you would jump in, because Brendan, you already read, right? Or did Tom read? Okay. Tom, go ahead and read verses 9 through 12, and let's bring those in here.
Okay, all right. Okay, so Solomon goes on and says, two are better than one because they have a good reward for their labor. For if they fall, one will lift up his companion. But woe to him who is alone when he falls, for he has no one to help him up. Again, if two lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one be warm alone? Though one may be overpowered by another, two can withstand him, and a threefold cord is not quickly broken.
Okay. I think that kind of builds on what we were looking at earlier in the text about the man who is alone without a companion, going back to verse 7 through 8, and then showing the benefit of one with the companion. What are your thoughts, Tom?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember that when Terry and I got married over 32, 33 years ago, we had this verse read. We had my dad read this verse as a part of the wedding ceremony because I appreciate the point. We need each other, and it's just a reminder that we need each other, and everybody needs some type of a companion. And then Solomon goes ahead and gives some reasons why it is. I might call it examples. One falls down, you got a companion to lift you up. But if you fall down and you're alone, you're in trouble. You need help getting up from that standpoint. The warmth, as it is mentioned there. One may overpower you, take advantage of you. There's safety in numbers. You hear that expression. And I love how he makes the point that while one can overpower, two can stand up against the one. And then he said the threefold cord is not quickly broken. And the point he's obviously making there is if two is good, if you've got three people, that makes it even better. I love using this in a wedding ceremony for the husband and wife, but obviously it's not just the husband and wife, and more than likely Solomon's not specifically dealing with a husband and wife in relationship. It's just a relationship that applies. But what I love about this, and even in the wedding situation, I like the idea of the threefold cord.
Mhm.
You know, the marriage that is going to survive spiritually is the marriage that has three people in it: husband, wife, and God. And you can picture the triangle, which I don't have a picture of it, but you know, God at the top, husband on one side, husband on one corner, wife on the other corner. And the beautiful thing about that analogy is when all have fellowship with one another the way that they ought to, you've got the relationship with God. The closer both of you are to God, the closer you will be to each other. And if one's closer to God and the other one's not, you've got a weird triangle, but it's still a triangle. But there's more distance between the one that's closer to God and the one that's further away from God than if you're both together pushing. So, anyways, I love this passage as that type of an emphasis.
And piggyback off of that, you know, I think if there's one takeaway from this section is remember the phrase "we, not me." That one of the keys to enjoying all that God has blessed us with is to enjoy it with others. I talked about, you know, I love good food. Uh, you know, a life motto has been life is too short to waste with bad friends and bad food. You know, if I have a good meal, you can endure some bad conversation. If you have some good conversation, you can endure a bad meal. But if you have a bad conversation and bad meal together, that ruins the whole thing. But this section here, whether you're single, married, widowed, whatever it may be, you need people in your life. And to work to the neglect of relationships is a hurt to yourself. To not be a dependable friend is a hurt to yourself and to others. And to simply enjoy everything God has given us alone, you know, it's going to have diminishing returns. I think the Swedish have a proverb that a joy shared is a joy doubled, and a sorrow shared is a sorrow halved, and that's biblical. That's biblical. To share the blessings amplifies the blessings, and I think to John's point, he's continuing on here, Solomon, and just as, you know, it's better to go at it 2 by 2. I mean, even Jesus sent the disciples out 2 by 2 when they were doing evangelism to begin with. So, one last point. One of my favorite stories about verse 11. Brother Floyd Thompson was in a meeting, and he had to stay in this back guest room, and it was a room they normally didn't turn the heat on. The vents were closed, and the host forgot to do that. He sent one postcard home to Ruth, and all it said on it was Ecclesiastes 4 and verse 11. Not the whole verse, just the reference. And Ruth included that in that book on Floyd. Says, and she didn't even quote it. She just said, "I'll let you find out what it says." So
that's funny. Taking Tom's thoughts on it just a little bit further with the husband, wife, and God, and I think that's a good illustration there. But let's bring even children into this, because you know when he says he has neither son nor brother, yet there's no end to all his labor. Going back to verse 8, and then we come down to here. Think about, and threefold cord is not quickly broken. Back to Andy's question, the original question there. If a man is working to provide for his family, he has the support of his family, of the wife and the children. They recognize the sacrifices that he's trying to make for them because they know his love. And his love's not just seen in the sacrifice, but in the time that he spends with them. And the family unit holds together. But if the family unit feels like the dad is pursuing the job over them and ignoring them and forsaking them, then they're not going to have his back, so to speak. They're not going to have that support there for him. It all must be there together, as a kind of a secondary thought to that too. And you know the difference between me and we, aside from the obvious alphabetical difference between the two. All right, when you have the W for we, think about something that can hold a lot. Hold the wife, kids, friends, companion. But when you turn that W upside down, you now have an M for the word me. And that all dumps out, and there's nothing left in there. Maybe? Illustration? I don't know. From a simple mind. Anyway. Well, I think that's probably sufficient for our
it was
study.
an illustration.
Whether or not it was a good illustration, but
Yeah, I
That's
happen
what you
to
do.
agree with it. I like it, but sorry, John. Sorry. Go ahead, wrap up.
there's been a few times in preaching I've come up with an illustration on the spot while I was preaching and think it would work great, and I'm done with that, and Rhonda says, that made no sense at all. And she wasn't the only one. So, but real quick, there's two additional comments. We missed one earlier from Mike in regards to our discussion about preachers. We need to be the kind of preacher that isn't afraid to make tents. While preaching is a profession, it is not the most common among the common who hear Christ gladly. It's a good point. Good point. And then later, in addition to what we're talking about, Mike says, additionally, the law of Moses said that everything was proven by 2 or 3 witnesses. How much better it is to labor with others than alone for the Lord. Coming back to our conversation about, and a threefold cord is not quickly broken. Good comparison.
Yeah, exactly. And Mike, if you know anything about Mike, Mike worked as a school teacher all his life, and he just recently retired just a few years ago, and I think he's now full-time preaching. But I mean, he's made tents all his life, and if I understand correctly, he's preached, even while he was teaching and so on. He's just able to do more now because he's retired. But he appreciates
people say preaching's not a real job, and teaching would just be right above that, so it's
right.
I'm kidding. I have high respect for teachers, and I feel sorry for a lot of the class environments they have to teach in these days. But
exactly. So.
Okay, well, any other thoughts on that before we move or end the study for today?
Nope.
All right, so let me take a minute, remind everybody that we will pick up next Thursday with verse 13 of Ecclesiastes chapter 4, there in verse 13. If you'd like to contact us during the course of this week, you can do it through a couple different means. You can send us an email, send it to questions@truthfactorlive.com. You can email us individually, as you'll see on the screen right there, okay? John at, Paul at, etc., truthfactor.com, or even send a text message to 405-726-1179. We'd like to hear what you have to say about these matters. Maybe you agree with things that we've said. Maybe you don't agree with the things that we have said. Either way, we'd love to hear from you and to get your thoughts on the matter. But that's all for now. Thank you so much for joining us for our study today. Gentlemen, it's good to see all of you. Tom, I think, as you were saying, you might be in my neck of woods this weekend. So we'll hopefully see you and your family on Sunday. So
yeah, exactly. And I will not be with y'all next week. As I guess most my mom passed away, and we're headed to her memorial. So
okay, all right. Well, we will keep you in our prayers. All righty. Y'all have a great week, and we'll see everyone again next Thursday, 11 o'clock a.m. Central Time, for another Truth Factor discussion. Hey, y'all have a great week. Bye-bye.